Art. It's one of the pillars of society that often gets taken for granted. It comes in many different forms and it takes on many different styles within those forms. Just look at Da Vinci's Mona Lisa and Van Gogh's Starry Night. Both are paintings and both are done in vastly different styles, but both are incredibly beautiful and convey the beauty and the truth of the world around them. Now, this principle holds true across all forms of art: books, plays, musicals, sculpture, and film. And of the forms I just mentioned, film, or cinema, is perhaps the most unique. It marries together elements of many of the previously mentioned art forms, and because of its wide reach, can bring a story originally presented in a play or book to a much broader audience. It breathes a new sort of life into characters who previously only lived on the page, and in the case of an original work, it introduces us to a new hero or heroine for us to admire and strive to emulate. This is what all art does. It presents us with an example of some virtue or moral we as individuals and as society ought to strive to achieve. We used to live in a time when good art was readily available for public consumption, particularly within the movie industry. The films like The Godfather, Robin Hood, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, the ones by George Lucas, The Agony and the Ecstasy, The Man in the Iron Mask, and so many others, which were filled with heroes we were meant to emulate and characters who were meant to serve as cautionary tales. The latter were meant to show the toll of straddling the line between vice and virtue, of justifying wrong or evil actions because they resulted in a good outcome. And of course, there were the villains, those characters who served as a stark example or the embodiment of the price of indulging and engaging in vice and evil. Now, not all stories were presented as melodramatically and in such stark contrast as what I just stated. The antagonists in some stories may have been made out to be a bit more comical or tragic, and the stakes of some stories were greater or lesser than others. But there was one thing that remained consistent. There was a clear divide between right and wrong. Even in stories that dealt with more complex moral quandaries and questions, this divide remained clear and consistent. And most importantly, there were clear and tangible consequences for the ill deeds that characters had committed. This has sadly and largely become an outlier in many stories that we see today. Just take a moment to think about the most recent releases from Hollywood and the film industry as a whole, and bring to mind just one movie or show that lives up to or matches the tenets that we just mentioned. I could maybe get to 5 if I really took my time to think about it. Sadly, most of the content produced today does not live up to or fulfill the requirements of even being considered a good story. Forget about a work of art. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why is this important? Why should I care? Sure, there's a ton of crappy films out there and shows too, but what difference does it make? Well, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, art has the incredibly potent power of conveying virtues or morals in a manner that is arguably more effective than any sermon or lecture. And this is the most important thing to consider when you have a medium as powerful, specifically as powerful as the movie industry, where you are able to broadcast a large-scale message to people literally all over the world. That should give us some pause about what kind of content we're producing. That should cause us to analyze what we're watching more critically than we did previously. And with a company like Disney, that can be really difficult because we grew up with this company. We grew up with these movies. We grew up with Cinderella and The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King and Toy Story and all of these other wonderful films that were both entertaining and taught us good morals and good lessons that we ought to be striving to emulate. So it can be hard to then turn around and look at this company that gave us so many good memories and then go, oh, is this film really good? Is it bad? I don't know. I feel torn on the inside. I want to keep loving this company that gave me so many good memories. And that's why I'm here with the Professors Tavern. I am Mark Conroe. I'm going to be your humble tavern keep here in this place, which I have named after two of my favorite authors who I believe are the best examples of not only modern storytelling, but storytelling in general. Of course, there's Professor J.R.R. Tolkien, who created the worlds of the Lord of the Rings and gave us probably the greatest story of the modern day and one of the greatest epics of all time. And the other being Professor C.S. Lewis, who gave us the worlds of Narnia. I picked these two specifically because they strike a good balance between creating a world of escapism that also embodies the virtues we ought to be striving for as a people and as a society in general. And here each week, we're going to take a look at what's going on in the world of Hollywood, what's going on in the entertainment industry, and we're going to break down what's happening. We're going to judge with a critical eye the content that is coming out to see if it truly lives up to, one, being a good story, or two, if it's art at all. Because the important thing, as I have said many times already in this video, and at risk of sounding like a broken record, I will say it again. Art influences society. It is one of the pillars of society. It conveys the way that we ought to act. We ought to act with virtue. We ought to act with integrity. We ought to adhere to a set of morals. And when you take those out of storytelling, you remove one of the buttresses, one of the legs upon which society stands. And it weakens us as a people. So if we want to have a good society, if we want to have a flourishing society, if we want to have a society full of just decent human beings, we at least need good art, because art should always be one step above where society is to give us a higher goal of virtue, of perfection that we strive to achieve. And right here each week in the tavern, we are going to examine what's going on in the world of Hollywood to see if anything out there lives up to that standard. So grab your pipes, grab your pints, join me here weekly in the Professors Tavern. If you liked what you heard, please consider liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing to the channel and ringing the notification bell to get an alert whenever I upload a video. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this far, and I hope I gave you something to think about. Thank you for joining me today in the Professor's Tavern.